Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first workshop for our Cultural Competency Fair. My name is Iman Bukhari, and I'm the founder and leader of Canadian Cultural Mosaic Foundation. We are a not-for-profit, volunteer-led that works to improve race relations. This fair, the Cultural Competency Fair, is essentially an opportunity to gain insight into, appreciate, and interact with different cultures and belief systems that you might not normally have the chance to connect with. This fair is an Alberta Days event and funded by the Government of Alberta, as well as some public funds generated on our website. Before we begin our event, I would like to acknowledge the land that we're on. By acknowledging the land that we're on, we're respecting the Indigenous peoples, their contribution and ways of knowing, which are reflected through the stories and songs that have lived on this land for thousands and thousands of years. This is, of course, an online event, so we may all be connecting from different places, but nonetheless, I am currently on Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So thank you so much again for joining us. This workshop that we're just about to begin actually offers us a gateway into the traditional Blackfoot ways of understanding and experiencing the world. This workshop will be recorded and it will be available through Facebook as well as YouTube with closed captioning after it's finished. And we encourage everyone who's listening live to honestly feel free to leave any comments or questions that you'd like to communicate to our guest lecturer with, and she will read those comments and get back to you. So with that, I would actually like to introduce our guest lecturer. Her name is Rebecca Many Gray Horses. She is a consultant and has a Masters in Jurisprudence in Indian Law from the University of Tulsa College of Law. So, welcome.
Okay. Nistuwen no ka itsunotsbia ki nitsgana ki nuftu nitsgana ki nuftu tu kana nikutasitak amotsi nidanika naksi poisi kistunna na ibata beatsen and any unstop best so. So thank you to the Canadian Cultural Mosaic Foundation for inviting me to come and speak about Blackfoot Ways this evening. I'm from the Kainai Nation and here in southern Alberta. I was raised with the Blackfoot Ways of knowing by my parents, grandparents, and the old ones, as I called them. My initiation to ceremonies started as a baby. My earliest memories of attending ceremonies was when I was 4 years old at an all-night ceremony. I was the only child there. So from that time on, I was immersed in our ceremonies, language, and Blackfoot teachings. My summer highlights, our summer highlights as a family, were spent in the month of August at the Belly Buttes for Akugatasan, our sun dance. My parents were spiritual leaders of one of our sacred societies, the Itzkinats, and my parents were keepers of the long-time medicine bundle. Actually, they captured the bundle back from the Alberta Provincial Museum in Edmonton in the 1970s. This was before repatriation laws were enacted. My mother had a dream that to go get the medicine bundle out of the provincial museum because it didn't belong there. And with the help of Adolph and Beverly Hungrywolf, they went and captured it back and brought it back home to our people. And these are the people that raised me to be knowledgeable about our ways. I was transferred as a medicine pipe bundle holder when I was 14 years old. So with this information, I'm able to talk about the knowledge of our Blackfoot ways. And so many of the information is from memory, from what I have been taught by my parents, and also in talking with elders to get the accurate information. I respectfully followed protocol and offered tobacco and payment when I asked for information. Some of the information comes from the academic papers that I researched when I was writing for my master's program. So with that, I would like to introduce, and as I mentioned before, Blackfoot Ways of Knowing encompasses so many subjects and topics. And so today I'm going to focus on Blackfoot traditional territory, land acknowledgements, Blackfoot cultural protocols, Blackfoot historical figures, Blackfoot women, and I will end with dispelling myths of monies, land, and resources that the mainstream media and society promote. Okay, next slide. So the Blackfoot traditional ancestral territory extends along the east side of the Rocky Mountains from the Yellowstone River in southern Montana, as you can see in the map there, north to the North Saskatchewan River, and east into the plains of Saskatchewan. And the Blackfoot believe that we've always lived in this location since time immemorial. And our history speaks of the origin of this place, and our continued relationship to this land remains today. So there are three reservations, or there are three nations that make up the Blackfoot Confederacy, and that is the one in northern Montana, which we call Amskapa Bigani. And then we have Bigani, which is in Brockett, and Gana, which is out in Standoff. And and then the fourth nation is Siksika. So those are the four tribes that make up the Blackfoot Confederacy. And this here map shows that this was our traditional territory. The four nations share common language, land base, and a common history. Today, they still practice the ceremonies, gatherings, and way of life as instructed by the Creator and left by our ancestors. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about our seasonal rounds within that territory. So the Bloods favored move-in within the areas east, which were the Cypress Hills for their summer camps and where the buffalo were plentiful. And their winter camps were along the Belly River, the Highwood, and along the Porcupine Hills. And to the south, the Blackfeet, the Amskapa Bigani, they occupied the area as far south to the Yellowstone. And the Siksika, they occupied that northern part of the territory, and as well as the Bigani, they were in the northern eastern part. So these were the areas that we lived in our ancestral times, and those were the areas that we did our seasonal rounds. There was a man by the name of John Ewers, who's an author, and he estimated that the North and South Bigani had 24 clans, and the Bloods had 13, and the Blackfoot had 8. But this might not be accurate because, they were always moving, and sometimes clans would dissolve and join other clans, and as they were free to join up with other clans. So this may not be an accurate count because we believe that there was more clans than that. So elders have taught us that our territory is marked by sacred sites, and that those sacred sites, the whole area of our traditional territory is marked by sacred sites, as well as we identify those sites and our boundaries by Napi stories and our Blackfoot legends. So this knowledge is passed through oral tradition, and as well, there's other evidence that shows, with artifacts and remaining landmarks that we have survived this, that this is the area that we settled. So there's other remaining landmarks such as medicine wheels, teepee rings, rock formations, pictographs, rock write-ins, effigies, buffalo jumps, pounds, and cairns that all provide historical clues. Many of these places have been destroyed, and some of these places were just rocks to the settlers. And so this disrespect continues today despite efforts to protect them. So there's been more than 160 Vision Quest sites have been identified from the Crow's Nest Pass along the Rocky Mountains down through Montana. All this being in Blackfoot traditional territory. And some of those sites include Ninastaku, which is Chief Mountain, Riding on the Stone, Majorville Medicine Wheel, Okuduk, which is Okotoks, the Big Rock, Sweetgrass Hills, and numerous others. And so, I'm going to reference back to our seasonal rounds. So within this vast territory, the Blackfoot people would travel well over 500 miles during a yearly cycle to hunt, gather, and renew spiritual commitment. In the dog days, the Blackfoot would average about 30 miles per day. However, during the horse travel days, they could double the miles they traveled. It was really important, the locations that they chose, because each of these sites provided the resources, the food, for their lifestyles. The buffalo was the most important, but camp locations were selected with other resources in mind as well. Each location was known for the resources, whether it was plants, animals, minerals, or whatever, and year after year, the people would return to them. And so the yearly cycle of the Blackfoot is divided into the 4 seasons, and really, when the buffalo roamed the land, the pattern of movement reflected where the buffalo were at the time. So this went on until the late 1880s, until we were signing treaties and being confined to reserves, and then from that time on, when we signed the treaties, then our lifestyle changed. We were confined to reservations, and we no longer followed the seasonal rounds, but we're restricted to a small place to learn ranching and farming. Okay, next slide. So, in explaining about our Blackfoot territory, this leads into why we do land acknowledgement, and why do we do land acknowledgement? For one thing, it's that First Nations have been here since time immemorial, and for the Blackfoot people, we have occupied this area and our allies long before contact, and it is respectful to acknowledge this. Allison Jones from a website describes land acknowledgement as land acknowledgement is a way that people insert an awareness of Indigenous presence and land rights in everyday life. This is often done at the beginning of ceremonies, lectures, or any public event. It can be a subtle way to recognize the history of colonization and a need for change in settler colonial societies. She adds that these acknowledgements can easily be a token gesture rather than a meaningful practice. All settlers, including recent immigrants, have a responsibility to consider what it means to acknowledge the history and legacy of colonization. What are some of the privileges settlers enjoy today because of colonization? How can individuals develop relationship with peoples whose territory they are living on? Do you understand the ongoing violence and the trauma that is part of the structure of colonization? So these vast areas of lands, as you can see in these treaties, the treaty picture there, they were they were occupied by First Nations. And so with the Blackfoot in signing with Treaty 7, we gave up, the right to these lands was taken from us, and we do not benefit from the land that was taken. And, one of the things that we can do is hunt on Crown land, but that is the extent to it. And I will go in further, I will explain dispelling some myths later. So those are the reasons why we should be acknowledging, why land acknowledgement is important to us as First Nations. Okay, and so we respectfully ask you to consider and to in turn this will better relationships with the original people of the land. Okay, next slide. So the next one that I would like to talk about is Blackfoot culture, traditions, and ceremonies. I'm going to just briefly skim over this because, again, this is another topic that is really, there's so many protocols to talk about. There's so much to talk about with this, but I'm just going to give some examples here. So we as Blackfoot people, we call ourselves the real people. Nitsitapi, that is what we call ourselves. We believe that we are the real people, and is the name we have for the essence of all life. We recognize plants, animals, and rocks as other living beings who are different from us, but are also our equals. And we have names for the four-legged animals, plants, and rocks. We call them the earth, and I can't say that word, but we call them earth beings. They come from the earth. And those beings that live in the sky, okay, I'm not going to try that again. So we believe that they live in the sky. That those beings that live in the sky. And our word for water beings is soyitapi. They live in the water. Those are the water beings. So those are the things that we recognize. And so when it comes to teaching our values, there's principles for living together and for existing with all creation. And these teachings are passed down through the ages. And the transmission of this knowledge happens through the lifetime of a person's life. You may learn some things, as a child, and then, that growing, the learning and growing is continual all through our lives. And values are taught, the values that were taught were essential for survival. Excuse me. And so the transmission of knowledge it happened through storytelling, and a lot of our legends are Nabi stories. They have life lessons in those stories, and that is why we teach through storytelling. And sometimes you might come across a First Nation person, and they're always telling stories, and so that is how we learn, and that is how we explain our experiences, is we tell a story. And so through this storytelling, it reinforces good behavior and, provides advice, so, that is a way that we teach, and that is a way we learn, is through storytelling. So the next is Blackfoot names. So through a lifetime of a person, this person may have different names. They may have a childhood name, and in their older years, in adulthood, they may change their names. And And some will change their names if they accomplish a great deed. And so they will get their name changed. Usually it's elders that bestow the names on their relatives, or they may go seek from our society members during Akugatsusen, during our Sundance, or anytime a ceremony is held. That is usually when people seek to get a name or to change their name. But also, it's not unusual to carry one name throughout our lifetime, such as for myself, Itsunotsubiaki. It means dances with all medicine pipe bundles. And that was given to me by my grandmother, who had a dream. And so I've kept that name since I was born and unto this day. So, and it's not unusual. People do that. And so the next thing I'll talk about is plant and medicine picking. So the Blackfoot have strict protocols for picking plants. The plants are to be picked at certain times of the year, certain season, and certain places. And there's protocols are practiced for picking. Prayers are offered. We make offerings before we pick. We take only what we need. So it's a reciprocal relationship that we have with the plants and medicine. We take, but we also give back. So one teaching that I always remember growing up is that when the berries are ripened and you pick that first berry, you take that first berry, you pray, and you offer it back to Mother Earth. And you thank Mother Earth for providing that, that berry, and you pray that the next year that there'll be more berries, and there'll be plenty, more to pick. So, that's one protocol that we practice. And some plants are picked by anyone who have the knowledge of those plants, but most of the plants and herbs that we have require the knowledge of herbalists, because it's like they get training like a pharmacist. A pharmacist knows what to mix with what. And so our herbalists are, they receive that same kind of training. They learn, what herb, what medicine should be mixed with what. So, and also they're given ceremonial transfers. They're given the rights to practice this medicine. They're given the rights to pick and use them. So those are the protocols, the strict protocols that we have for picking plants. And so the next protocol is hiring elders. The right protocol of hiring elders is to talk to them in person and request their assistance. Today, it is acceptable to give them a phone call. When they agree to come to assist you, provide some compensation, because these are our subject matter experts. They're our knowledge keepers. They're the ones that have the knowledge. And as you would pay a consultant, as you would pay, some expert, compensation, so would you do the same, with elders. So before the start of the activity, you would offer them tobacco, and then when they're done, then you can offer them other payments. And they would start the activity with a prayer, and it depends on the person and organization of how they would pay. Some have policies and practices in place. Okay. And the next protocol that I will talk about is attended ceremonies. If you are invited to attend a ceremony or a powwow, it would be wise to ask the person who invited you about the protocols, before you go. At our big camp, Akugatsusen, the public is invited, but there are strict protocols to follow. No cameras, no pictures, and being still and quiet during the ceremony. Other ceremonies, such as beaver bundle and medicine pipe bundle ceremonies, are usually open to the public with an invitation. The same would be advisable to follow the protocols, of course, with no cameras. You can't take pictures, and asking questions and permission to be involved. Okay, the next slide. Okay, so the next topic that I'm going to talk about is Blackfoot historical figures. Like with every culture, every society, they have their own role models, their own champions, their heroes. So for the same for us as for Blackfoot. And we have, today I'm calling them Blackfoot historical figures, but some of them have demonstrated an importance, of our history. We acknowledge them for that. Some have been champions. Others have contributed to the ongoing transmission of culture and language. Nevertheless, each one of them have been known to the Blackfoot, having high significance in our history, and their stories should be continued to be passed from generation to generation. So I'm going to give two historical figures of two men and two women, because this topic could go on and on. So I'm just going to be brief with this too as well. So the first one I'm going to talk about is White Mountain Horse. He was a member of the Blood Tribe, and he came from a family of warriors. And he worked as a scout for the Northwest Mounted Police, and he enlisted in the First World War in 1916. And when Mike returned home, he was recognized as a hero by the Blood Tribe and was celebrated at Akugatisan powwows and grand entries. So when Native veterans come home, from war and are discharged, nothing really changed for them. They went back to reserve life, whereas in mainstream, those veterans received land, and there was other benefits that they were given, but for our Native veterans, they were not. So his recognition, he was recognized and he was celebrated. Of course, he was acknowledged, for that, for being a veteran. But he was also an author, and he wrote the book, My People, the Bloods. So that's what he's remembered for. The next one I'm going to talk about is Red Crow. And so Hugh Dempsey describes Chief Red Crow, who signed Treaty 7, as a warrior, a peacemaker, and he was a kind of chief. He was born approximately in 1830 near the junction of St. Mary's and Old Man River, and he died in August 1900. So he was a head chief of the Blood Tribe, and this was during the transitional period of, having that nomadic seasonal round lifestyle to reservation life. So it was such a huge transition for our people, and he was the chief at that time. And so he was a really strong advocate for our people. He tried his best to improve conditions for his people in the wake of monumental changes and the decline of buffalo. And he also saw, the encroachment of European settlers and the disastrous effects of all this. So Red Crow is one of our chiefs, and we continue to tell this story to this day. The next one that I will talk about is Natuiksinaki, who is Holy Snake Woman, and she was she was from the Blood Tribe, and she was married to Alexander Culbertson, who was the chief trader for the American Fur Company. And so during those times, I think it was the early 1840s that she married Alexander Culbertson. And it was common at that time for officers to marry the daughter of chiefs. So they would cement those trade and relations. And so she helped her husband in negotiating for treaties, and as well as she was renowned for other things, like in our family, we have stories of her that are passed down. She was, because she married this Alexander Culbertson, who was very wealthy. They were very wealthy at one point because of the fur trade. And so she would dress in her finery, and then when she would come home, she would be surrounded by the other women. They would admire her nice clothes. So those are one of the stories that I know of her. So she was one of the women, that was a strong role model for us. And the other one is Annie Writes at the Door. And she was what we would consider a mother, a holy mother for the blood tribe. She was Okan. She did the Okan, and she initiated the most sacred lodge, the most sacred ceremony. And she went through many ceremonial transfers. Her and her husband were medicine bundle keepers and beaver bundle holders. And she made a vow for her daughter to become a member of the Horn Society. And this is a society that only accepts, a man and wife. But because she made that vow, she was able to join that society. And her daughter would dress in a men's buckskin outfit as she would dance with the society. So those are the historical figures that I have. And they have their rightful place in history, and we still tell their stories today. Okay, next slide. So the next one is Blackfoot Women. So the lifestyle of the Blackfoot women before contact consisted of being keeper and owner of the lodge. And of course, they were the parents, they raised their children, and they were also medicine people for the family. They were property owners too of horses, medicine bundles, and teepee lodges. And their spiritual roles were very significant. There were some ceremonies that could not be carried out without the woman being involved. Excuse me. So our most sacred Ogan Lodge is sponsored by a woman, and as I mentioned, there are other ceremonies that need the assistance of the woman for it to be carried out. Women were also basic to the functioning of the economic system of the tribe, as well as with the clan family system. They enjoyed the rights of wealth and could own and inherit property. They're owners of horses, as I mentioned, and they were known to be well-established horsewomen. And they rightfully owned their own teepees. We also have Blackfoot women warriors, and they were called manly-hearted women. Ninawakis. That's not the right word, but that's what I wrote down for some reason. And so these are women that hunted and went to war with the men, and they were treated as leaders, and they were renowned for their acts of bravery, going into enemy camps, and counting coup on the enemies, stealing horses and other headdresses, other things as such. And so these stories of these manly-hearted women, they included married women who participated in manly activities with their husbands, and they also excelled at feminine tasks. They kept their lodges clean. They sewed, for their family and such. And but sometimes, and they were married, but there was others that were not married, but they were considered manly-hearted women. They were also displayed characteristics as masculine. They were aggressive, independent, and bold. And so the stories of the manly-hearted women illustrate the leadership skill and positions that the Blackfoot women had in their respective tribes. And a couple of examples that comes to mind is Running Eagle, Skaba Biganaki, Running Eagle. She was from the Blackfeet tribe. Revenge Walker, who was a Ganaki. She was aunt to Red Crow. Was she aunt or was she sister? I think she was sister to Red Crow. Yes, because Miss Alexander Culbertson was the aunt. So Revenge Walker was the sister to Red Crow, and she was one of these manly-hearted women. So with contact, the social and family order of the Blackfoot changed, and this affected that Blackfoot women's roles and responsibilities. Residential schools affected parenting as children were taken from families, and the women were affected as they were no longer with their children. Colonization and assimilation changed the role of women, and the adopted perceptions of mainstream were prevalent or are prevalent. Women were no longer recognized as being property owners under the Indian Act, the legislation that still is enforced with First Nations in Canada, and they were no longer equals to their male counterparts. Okay, next slide. Okay, the next slide is our land, our resources, and our monies, dispelling the myths. So, in order to, there's a big myth, and this big myth is that First Nations get everything free and they get millions of dollars. And so in order to understand this myth is one has to learn about the treaties. And when the treaties were signed, there was annuities. And with these annuities, there was payments. Okay, so some of the annuities that were promised with this was some cash, twine, ammunition, a medicine chest, promises of school, a chief's coat. Our chiefs were supposed to be dressed in their coat, certain, clothing. And so those are some of the annuities that were promised in the treaties. And when we talk about cash, we're talking about $5. And that was included in the treaties that we would all get $5. So to this day, yes, we still get $5. And so this amount has been the same since the signing of the treaties. And there's been no consideration for inflation. We still get $5. And there's a researcher, he's Mohawk, his name is Richard Powless, and he wrote that with many of the treaties that were negotiated, promises of cash payment were made. And First Nations didn't have banks, so the monies owed to First Nations were placed in trust accounts in banks in England and Scotland. After Confederation, these funds were transferred from Britain to Canada and placed in the Consolidated Revenue Fund, which was the bank account the Canadian government used to run the day-to-day operations of Canada. There are many specific claims today against Canada for the misuse of First Nation trust funds. To this day, there has never been a full accounting of Indian trust monies held by the Crown and transferred to Canada. And so he says that we see that the Crown owes a debt to First Nations of the Valley of the Promised annual presents from before Confederation, and the Crown owes First Nations the funds promised to them in treaties. It is clear that Canada used First Nation funds to run Canada in its early days, even up to the 1960s. And so this, this is the research that he has come up with. And so there's, that is the money that we get. They talk about big cash. We only get $5. So, and then in terms of resources, and there is no source revenue sharing from province and federal lands with First Nations. Like when the province and the federal government benefit from lumber, oil, and there's no resource sharing with First Nations. So, we don't benefit from that. And then there's that myth of, First Nations get all their education paid for. Well, it's only status Indians recognized by the federal government as being Indian that are eligible to receive funding for post-secondary education through Indigenous and First Northern Affairs funding. But this is limited, and not everyone gets sponsored. If you do get sponsored and you are eligible, it's only for limited units. And a lot of post-secondary students are using student loans to get through school. So, that myth of everyone gets free education, it's not so. And so land, under the Indian Act, First Nation people do not own their land. Instead, it's held for them by the government. Because of this policy, First Nation people who currently live on reserve do not enjoy the same property rights as every other Canadian. We cannot get loans or use the land for collateral. Excuse me, I just need a drink. So, and then, we talk about, that the federal government sends us these large amounts of dollars. Well, under the Indian Act, the federal government is responsible for providing programs and services. Okay, so let me just read this part. So, the federal government is responsible for providing programs and services that most non-Indigenous communities in Canada receive from provincial and municipal levels of government. In other words, the same services are provided, but just through different levels of government. So, under the Indian Act, the federal government is responsible for providing programs and services, as the province and the municipalities are responsible, for providing, for Canadians, depending on where they live. And then we do get transfer dollars, and that is how we operate funding on the reserve. But for the most part, we have our own revenue source, whether it's from agriculture, oil and gas, we do have our own dollars. So that money coming from taxpayers, that's also, not true, because we do have our own resource revenue that comes in. Okay, and then paying income tax. Yes, we do pay income tax. We pay property tax, income tax, education, and all applicable taxes if we live and work off reserve. There is federal tax exemption for status Indians, under the Indian Act, but it applies to very specific and limited conditions, like you do not have to pay federal or provincial taxes if you live and work on reserve. Right, so I said, so status Indians who work on reserve do not pay federal or provincial taxes on their employment income. Okay, so those are the myths that we hear about every day, and presumptions, that we get all this money and we have all these, access to land, that we have all these resources that we have access to, and they're just not true. So, that's what I have to say about that. And so this, and next slide, please. So, okay. So this ends my my presentation, and I'd like to thank you all for coming, for taking time out of your evening to listen to this presentation, and I hope that I was able to provide some education on our Blackfoot ways, and as well as I hope that I was able to dispel some myths for you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for your knowledge. It's incredibly important for myself, for example, as an immigrant, to learn about the people of this land, and particularly because I live in Calgary, to learn about the Blackfoot people and their ways of knowing. So thank you so much. So anybody who has any comments, it's open floor. Feel free to share your comments or any questions. I'm just going to be putting up some of the comments here that we have coming. A lot of folks thanking you for for sharing your knowledge. We have Tony Snow saying also funds from our resource development, that money went into those trust accounts, so we can't access our own money except through the government.
Right.
We have Fergus Dalton saying, I'm curious to know a little more about the history and meaning behind the Sundance.
Okay, so that's again, that's one of those topics that it's the history of it. It's since time immemorial. We've always had our ceremonies. We've had our akugatsusen. We've had it since time immemorial. Those ceremonies, that knowledge keeps getting passed down from generation to generation. Of course, with colonization, there's a period there with legislation that wanted to ban, those ceremonies, those sun dances, those potlatches. And so we, there was a time, that we almost lost, those ceremonies, but, thankfully, for some strong ancestors that held on to those ceremonies and went underground even at times, or, openly defied, the Indian agent and had those ceremonies, like my parents and my grandparents, they were one of those people that held on to those ceremonies. So, and, like the meaning, it's our spiritual connection to Creator. We have these ceremonies, and, that meaning could be, it could extend from, as a collective, what is the meaning for akugatsusen for us? As a collective, it's our time to get together to pray. It's our time for reconnection, with our ceremonies, reconnection as clans, transmission of knowledge, all the way to the individual. I've come here, to make a vow, so it ranges, that meaning, ranges. And yeah, I could go on and explain this, but also I need to take into consideration that I don't have the rights to talk about these some of these ceremonies. I only have the rights to talk about what was transferred to me. But I don't have the right to talk about those societies, with our akugatsusen. Only rightfully those society members can talk about that. Okay.
Thank you so much. I'm just sharing some of the comments coming through. A lot of folks thanking you so much for sharing your knowledge and saying that this is incredible. Very informative. Thank you. Dispelling the myths was my favorite part, and also a responsibility for everyone to learn. Very true. I have one question here. What is the name of the language traditionally spoken by the Blackfoot people traditionally from the prairies, plains, and what is the corresponding title pronunciation of places called Edmonton and Calgary?
So our Blackfoot language is well, like our real language, if I say I speak the real language. I speak, that's the best way I can describe that. So for Calgary, it is Mohkinstis elbow, and Edmonton is, I think it's big house. I can't think about that right now. Mohkinstis, it'll come to me. Just wait. I'll come back to that. Edmonton. Yeah.
Okay, so again, lots of thank yous, really enjoyed learning. And does the Jay Treaty still play a part in travel for Native First Nations?
It does. See, Canada doesn't recognize the Jay Treaty, and if I remember correctly, it was when Canada became independent, and so they no longer recognize the Jay Treaty. But the U.S. government still recognizes the Jay Treaty. So, as a Canadian First Nation, as a Canadian Blackfoot, I could still go and live and work in the U.S. and get citizenship there too. Yeah.
From Cam, in a matriarchal society, can you break down the term man thanking woman thank you from Treaty 4 in Saskatchewan?
Not off the top of my head, but if you want to inbox me, Facebook, I can try and help you with that.
Awesome. And we have Chelsea. What is the relationship between Cree and Blackfoot?
Are we talking historically or are we talking today? Because if we're talking historically, of course, there was tribal enemies, but today, as First Nation to First Nation, we would like to see each other as allies, and today's a different world. We have our people are intermarrying, and that tribal rivalry, being tribal enemies, it's no longer there, because we've intermarried into tribes. We face the same, the same problems, So, I think that we would like to look at each other, that relationship, as being allies. Yeah, today. Yeah.
So we have lots of questions coming in. For example, this one, can you please tell us more about the heroes Blackfoot people learn about? And I know that's a very heavy loaded question. We only have so much time. So if there
Right.
are some resources maybe that they could learn from, if there's not enough time, then maybe you can point that out.
Right. So I called them Blackfoot historical figures because they were our heroes, our champions, and I mean, just in my research with that, I came, and I talked with the elders, and of course we talked about the chiefs, that signed the treaties, our prominent chiefs, that held together. They were very strong in holding our territory together, and those stories are passed down, through the generations, and the stories of our women, those have been, our history is oral, like not much was written down, but the oral history. So, that's how we learned about who our heroes, our role models should be. Today we have role models, we have doctors and, scientists, we have, activists, we have, we have those role models, today, that are just as important as our heroes from the past. Yeah.
As an Aboriginal independent filmmaker, I'm working on a project about the preservation of our Aboriginal traditional cultural language. Can you quickly narrow down the basics? again, if it's a heavy question, then she can ask or maybe message you afterwards.
That's a loaded question, and it's going to take a long time to talk about the preservation of our Aboriginal traditions. If you can inbox through Facebook, yeah.
Yeah, and I will provide that contact information as well, so everyone has it.
Right.
How could First Nations on reserve have the same property rights as a city dweller to use land as collateral, buy or sell, without a risk that the land would no longer be owned by the First Nation?
That is a difficult question, because it's a collective, our tradition tells us, to look at, it from a collective perspective, that we all own this land, that we're all part of this tribe, we're all part of this nation. So I don't, and other tribes, like I know in BC, they have a transition to fee simple, so that they can have those same property rights as a city dweller. And, some of those stories, of them owning their property, some, yes, for economic benefits, it has happened. And then for others, they've ended up losing, their land and their house. So it would be very risky. Yes, it would be very risky if we could no longer hold it collectively. But we got to find other ways of, working, as an economy within our own nation, so that we can have those same benefits, to be able to make loans and, be able to build and, take care of each other with, the land that we have. Yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca, for sharing. What happened, I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, what happened to the school in Southwest Calgary for First Nation students? Is there something comparable for young people to learn more about their traditions and crafts?
I don't know about the school in Southwest Calgary. And what we're seeing on the Blood Tribe is that resurgence of young people wanting to learn about our ways and our societies. We have societies for young people, and there's more and more that are coming back to our ways, and they want to learn, and they're joining the societies. They want to learn their language, So we do see that resurgence, and I know there's efforts made, to try and connect young people to their culture. And, I just think of organizations that are doing this, that are, making these efforts to have that for our young people.
From Teresa, thank you so much. This was such a great overview. I really liked hearing about the herbalists and dispelling the myths. I've tried to explain to some people when they bring up these myths, and now feel better prepared to dispel the myths.
Good. Great.
From Reba, thank you for sharing and bringing awareness on our rich Blackfoot history to anyone wanting to know more. There's a head smash and buffalo jump museum. Also in Siksika Nation, there is TV for Blackfoot Crossing Museum. You can go with your family and visit and learn more on Treaty 7 and the Blackfoot culture. That's awesome. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So lots of thanks, lots of love. Thank you so much for sharing. Mm-hmm. Here, Edmonton is, cannot pronounce that, but meaning Beaver Mountain Hills.
Right.
Thank you so much for sharing. We need more often these types of presentations to understand. What advice do you give to youth to connect to their identity?
My advice would be that we need to have a strong sense of identity, a strong connection to our land, to our people. I think we need to provide more and better opportunities for our youth, so that this is available for them. We have children in foster homes. We have children, that are still suffering from intergenerational trauma, and and we have people are people that are on the streets with addiction. Do we have to meet them there where they're at? To connect with them, so that they can connect to who they are. So we have to be innovative. We have to be progressive thinkers. With our youth, because we are, there's a high number right now we're experiencing with them in addiction. So I think a strong identity helps with that.
What makes a good storyteller on Plains Cree?
I like telling stories, and I don't know if I'm a good storyteller, but I that's the way I express myself. That's the way I can express my ideas. That's how I could express my problems. So yeah, I think anybody could be a good storyteller. You just got to learn how to tell a story.
And we have one last question. I myself need to go. Thanks. I am going to bring my son soon to learn more about our history. Even as Blackfoot, we have not always been taught, as residential schools really affected our past and how we were able to learn culture today. And just lots of thank yous. So if anybody has any final questions, it's been just about an hour now. So now is the time. We have Rebecca here, who's incredibly knowledgeable. And thank you so much for sharing so much with us. And to the folks who had questions that were a bit larger in terms of answers, I'll provide you that contact information, and then you can connect with Rebecca yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like there's no other questions, but lots of thank yous, lots of people appreciating your knowledge sharing, which we really appreciate as well. And we hope, at least as an organization, that these kind of opportunities bring a lot of understanding towards other cultures.
Yeah.
As well.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. It seems like we have just one last question, if we can just okay. How can we create nurturing environments for Indigenous youth to research?
We need to be accepting of them. We need to come at their level. We need to meet them at their level. Like I mentioned before, there's so many of our youth that grew up without the traditions, that grew up without the ceremonies, without the history. And, because of the disruption with residential school and assimilation, colonization. And so it's like, we're just, barely coming back, but we're coming back strong, in learning about our culture and our history. And, I still think that we are doing well, because I've been to our ceremonies, I've been to our Kukatsasin, our Sundance, and there are so many young people that are coming that want to join the societies, that want to learn to speak Blackfoot. Even saying Oki or Hanya, they're learning, and they want to learn, and they're thirsty for it, and they're craving it, and we just have to make space for them, to come into the circle, to come to the ceremonies.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Thanks all for tuning in. We still have 7 more events this month that we're doing for our Cultural Competency Fair. So please feel free to join the rest. The information is on our Facebook page, as well as CanadianCMF.com. Again, Rebecca, Many Grey Horses, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. It has been an absolute pleasure and privilege.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so do I just log